So tell me about how these connections with each other and these life experiences, these personal journeys and these relational journeys led you to collectively realize that the Soul Focus Group was something that needed to be in existence. And for those who are just joining us, the Soul Focus Group was the organization that predated Human Solidarity Project. Human Solidarity Project started out as an offshoot of Soul Focus Group. And so a little bit of historical context. What made you realize that the Soul Focus Group and the work that would become HSP was needed in the world?
Well, first of all, Dustin and I, when we came up with the idea of Soul Focus Group, it was because we wanted to get paid more money. Being honest, just putting honesty on the table. We felt like we wasn't getting paid what we was worth from doing the workshops we were doing. So we wanted to put together a workshop that we call Sending the Right Signal, so that companies could embrace the idea of sending the right signal around race, around gender, around sexual orientation, the whole idea of connecting more with people. So we came together and we created a process. And what we noticed was that there was this incompleteness in the work that we had been doing, because we were socially conscious, but there was no spiritual consciousness in the movement, right? So there was social conscious, no spiritual conscious. And we said, we got to integrate the two together. We got to integrate social consciousness with spiritual consciousness to create what we call soul focus. So the idea of being soul focused was the integration of those two consciousness, which then led us later on to human solidarity. But when we start putting those two together, social consciousness and spiritual consciousness, started reconnecting us back to ourselves, reconnecting us to our deepest emotions and feelings. And we started having to face some of our lessons that we had run from in our life. Because as Dustin and Martin will tell you, there were a lot of situations where we didn't get along with each other. Not necessarily me, Dustin, and Martin, but in other collectives where we were working, doing social justice work, the relationships were toxic. I mean, I was going financially broke. My health was going to the crap, family breaking up. All of us were experiencing the side effects of being disconnected from yourself and not wanting to admit it, because you're standing before people, audiences every day, and you want people to believe that you already arrived, when the reality is you're struggling to arrive within yourself. You haven't gotten there yet. You haven't even reached the point where you feel good about yourself, really. So you're doing a lot of performing. And so Soul Focus Group became that conduit for us to begin the healing process. And that began with the integration of social consciousness and spiritual consciousness. And when we say spiritual consciousness, we're not talking about religion, because people used to ask us that all the time. Y'all talking about religion? No, we're talking about emotional. We're talking about the emotions within ourselves that we were not expressing, that people do not express. The average person you meet, Steph, is walking around in extreme pain, that they are not processing, they are not healing. So thank goodness we created that as a beginning for healing, loving, and thriving.
Martin, Dustin, anything you want to add to that sort
Yeah,
of
for
crazy?
me, yeah, I definitely want to add to it, Steph, because I want to honor that, like Mahdi said, it was really him and Dustin that came up with this idea, the combination of the coaching and stuff. I want to be really honest. That I didn't know that I needed something else until I heard from Dustin and Mahdi the ideas, and then because I was very constricted in my thinking, and I really thought that I had to get better and better at being anti-racist, and then everything would be okay, and not realizing, like Mahdi said, that a lot of the relationships were really toxic, and I was miserable in my own ways too. I had serious health issues due to being extremely overweight, falling apart, family, massive addictions, um, and yet just always pushing through, pushing through, pushing through. And so when these conversations started, when they shared with me this idea, I was really excited, but it took me a minute because I had to really think outside of my constricted box and see a possibility beyond what I was doing, because I felt like the most important thing for me was this loyalty that I had to have to a specific way of doing things. And Dustin and my what they presented to me and shared with me and asked me to be a part of started to open up possibilities that I didn't even know existed for myself. So that's why I was so excited to be a part of this at the beginning.
The only thing I would add, because I think they both captured it really well, is when we think about the toxicity we saw in the organizing work, understanding now that that was a mirror to what was toxic within ourselves, right? Because people just were what they were. What really made it toxic for us, it was triggering old memories, right, that were buried from wounds that we suffered when we were 5, 6, 7, 4, 8, 9 as babies, right? And we were in that kind of cycle of trauma mastery, trying to fix root traumas through fighting against racism and ultimately fighting against each other in the work, right? And we were just, Mahdi says love. We would say I love you, but we weren't really modeling love towards each other for sure. But we weren't modeling love towards ourselves in terms of how we were living. And so, as each of us stepped into that more, and I say, I say as if we stepped into that more because we're still very much stepping into that. I think the magic of what is us, whether it's Soul Focus Group, the Human Solidarity Project, the magic in us is that we are completely vulnerable with ourselves in the journey. Everything that we share in any space, whether that's with workshops, coaching, podcasts, videos, what have you, we're putting our own story in the center of the conversation.